Today I'd like to talk about being faithful as we go along the journey that God has for us. And before I dig into that, I want to have a look at Luke 2, verse 52. And this verse comes after Jesus has been born. It's after they've gone to Jerusalem, and his parents didn't know where he was. They found him in the temple. And he says that, is claiming then that, you should have looked for me in my father's house. He's saying that, that they should have known he was in his father's house, and coming to an understanding of God being his father. And then there's this verse, and then after that it goes into the baptizing and the teachings of John the Baptist, and then Jesus' ministry. And bridging that gap between Jesus being a young child to him being around 30 years old and beginning his ministry, we have Luke 2, verse 52. And that is, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man." Now, we kind of see that here as it's a big chunk of Jesus' life that's summed up in a verse. It's probably the biggest chunk, or one of the biggest chunks of his life, as far as if you look at his ministry, if you look at before he went to Jerusalem, if you look at the time where they're going to Jerusalem for the feast, or even just his birth. Of all those sections of time, the time between them going to the feast and him starting his ministry is the biggest section. So in that section of his life, it's covered by one verse. Just that he increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. Now, what can we glean from this? What can we learn from this? What I would say we can glean from this would be that as we look at our lives, as we look at the way events transpire, we can't necessarily expect them to fit a timeline that we would necessarily want them to. If you think about, Jesus, he was born, or even if you look at his parents and Mary and Joseph, and they see what happens when he was born, and maybe they tell Jesus about it, and you hear those things, and you think about that, we'd think this child is going to grow up and he's going to be a king. And then, he starts becoming a teenager, and he's not really ascending to the throne. Maybe he's, learning his father's craft. Maybe he's becoming a good carpenter. He's becoming respected in Nazareth. But he's not really vying with Herod for the throne here, let alone Caesar or anybody. He's not really on the trajectory to be the king. Or maybe, you're thinking he's going to be a great prophet or something like that. Well, there's no real record of him going and studying with the Pharisees, or there's no record of him performing miracles between those times. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But there's nothing recorded. The Bible doesn't really give us that much insight. There's nothing that the Bible really takes note of. The way the Bible frames it is that his first public miracle was that he worked was the feast at Canaan with the turning the water into wine. And if you think about that, what that must have been like for Jesus' parents, of being told those things, of hearing and experiencing all that happened at Christmas, with Herod killing all these children just because your kid was born. He was trying to kill your kid. The king's literally trying to kill your kid. And the angels coming to the shepherds, and the shepherds coming, and you have these kings or magi or wise men, or most likely they weren't necessarily kings, but these great men coming and giving gifts to your son. And then you have nothing for quite a while. Now, us looking at as far as the Bible, we can very easily go, here is, this that happened at the beginning, this was told, and he grew up, and then when he got to the right age, he did exactly what he became who God had said he was going to be. He became the king of the Jews. He always was, but that became manifest in his life, rather. So how can we apply that ourselves? What are the things that God has placed in our heart that he desires for us to do? What are the things that we feel that God has for us. When we feel God's leading us in a direction, do we give up after like a few days if it doesn't come to pass? Maybe a week, a month, a year or two? Do we just give up on the promises of God? Do we give up on what He's called us to do? Or are we willing to keep believing it? And not only are we willing to, not only do we need to be willing to keep believing the promises of God, but in this verse it says that Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. Are we willing to keep seeking God? Because that's the only way that you truly increase in wisdom, is by seeking God, because of just who He is. And the wisdom of man is nothing compared to who He is. And we can't increase in favor with, maybe with some men, but as a whole we can't really increase in a sustainable way favor with men apart from God. And we most definitely cannot gain favor with God apart from Him working within us. So are we not only willing to continue to believe the promises of God, but are we also willing to allow God to change us, allow God to transform us, allow Him to take us and mold us? And sometimes that's hard, sometimes that's painful. Sometimes it feels like we're just going around in circles and there's really nothing that is of interest or value, or God, why am I in this season? Well, maybe you're in a season where you're meant to grow in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. Maybe God has things for you to do. Maybe He has things that He's promised in your life. Maybe there's things He hasn't even revealed to you yet. But no matter what season we're in, we need to make sure that our focus is on Him, and that we don't let the dreariness of everyday life pull us away. We can't let our relationship with Him be dependent on exciting things happening. Our relationship with Him has to be dependent on who He is and Him alone. It can't be circumstantial. It's not really a very deep relationship if it's circumstantial. So let's make sure as believers that every single day we're seeking His face and we're striving to be people who grow in wisdom and we grow in favor with man, but most importantly with God, each and every day, no matter what that day holds. Thank you for watching the Frontline Update. If you like this video and want to hear more, please subscribe and click the notification bell. If you are interested in listening via podcast or would like to check out our blog, visit frontlinemn.org for more info. We look forward to seeing you next week. The best is yet to be.